Symbiosis. So symbiosis is about living together. So it's a term that's used to describe the interdependence. So inter means between. So the dependence between organisms. There are four main types. It's not the be all and end all, this list. There are probably subcategories in each one, but we're only going to focus on these. So mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, and then competition and predation. Mutualism is relationship, and it shouldn't surprise you, it's mutually beneficial. So mutualism, mutually beneficial. So both organisms in this situation are benefiting. What we can see here is we have a relationship between an anemone fish and the anemone itself. So you probably heard these guys called clownfish, and it's a pretty good name for them because they do very colourful. So this one's mutually beneficial because the anemone protects the clownfish. It lives in there, and the anemone has stinging cells, but the anemone fish does not get stung by those cells. So it gets protection, it gets a home to live in. What the clownfish does for the anemone is it brings food, and it also cleans it. And funnily enough, if you've ever seen a little clownfish, they're quite aggressive, so they'll really charge at things and then run away and hide. So that behaviour itself protects the anemone. Things that are mutually beneficial: cleaning in exchange for food, that's a really common one. Pollination in exchange for food. So insects, they're basically going around pollinating lots of plants, and even some small mammals are doing it, and they're getting a feed out of it. Protection in exchange for food, and camouflage in exchange for food or a home. So there are bacteria that sometimes live in an organism and can help it change colour. Commensalism, a relationship where one benefits, the other one is really unaffected. It's really hard to get completely unaffected. That's why I've just used the word essentially unaffected. It's just not a great harm or not a great benefit. Protection, food, camouflage. So here's a cobia. It's been bitten by a shark. Lost its dorsal fin. It's amazing in the ocean that animals can still survive when they've had injuries like this. The shark wouldn't have enjoyed it because these are all really sharp spines, so it would have got a mouthful of spines. And then the cobia escaped somehow. So this cobia swims with the whale shark, and quite often when you see whale sharks, you might see two or three, and they're protected essentially. The cobia also benefits because as it sits under the whale shark, it might spy other little fish, and you see them quickly dart out and then quickly back in under the whale shark. So they're protected from reef sharks, tiger sharks, white sharks, things like that. They also have an opportunity, and they kind of almost got a home living with the whale shark as it swims along. Here we have a decorated crab. Here's its eye. There's one of its front claws, another claw here. That little thing is where it's lost a leg. So it only had 5 or 6 legs, this particular crab. But hilarious. Like it was so aggressive. It kept charging at me. It's quite funny. But we can see that it's got lots of, not corals, we've got algae, and then we got some, I don't know what they're called. They sting when you touch them though. And we can see how this blue spotted ray swimming around and is being followed by this massive posse. These two little guys, they're cleaner wrasse, so they're probably there to clean it. That humbug is just there. These wrasse are following it around most certainly. So what happens is this ray digs into the sand, lots of stuff gets thrown up in the air, and these guys will come in and try to grab it. You've all heard of parasites. Parasites harm their host. Now they can harm it to varying degrees. So what can happen is a parasite feeds off an organism, or maybe even reproduces in a host organism. This one often leads to death, because once you've had something reproduce inside you, it tends to break down cells and kill. It causes a fair bit of damage. So if you think sometimes we get, as humans, we get worms, those worms are a parasite. Your bum might feel itchy or something like that. So they're actually reproducing in there. They're not killing you, but they're causing you harm. It's just not that severe with that particular parasite. There's a copepod sitting on top of this fish. Oh, it's sucking it. It's feeding on it. Now that fish is probably not going to die from that situation unless there's a big infection or something like that. But it would be particularly unpleasant. So there's more copepods sitting on the lip of this whale shark. So it's a couple of meters across that mouth. So organisms live in a habitat, and they've got to get food from somewhere. The bottom of the food chain are producers. So what producers do is they produce the food at the very beginning of a food chain. So these are organisms like plants that do photosynthesis. They use energy from the sun to make food. Very clever. What happens is the energy is stored in sugars, and when those sugars are eaten by something else, the energy is released again. So the energy that you're using right now from the food that you ate, the energy in those sugars came from the sun. That's pretty crazy. Consumers are anything that eats either a producer or another consumer. Herbivores are consumers that eat plants. Carnivores are consumers that eat animals. Omnivores are consumers that eat both plants and animals. And decomposers break down the bodies of dead organisms. A number of different food levels. Producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, up to the apex predator. Now these food chains can be really long to do with what eats, what eats, what eats, what eats, what eats, in order, in a line. We have two apex predators here. That's a saltwater crocodile. It's got a little dragonfly on its head. And these are wedge-tailed eagles. They're apex predators as well. So the only thing that eats wedge-tailed eagles would be after they're dead. Some might even, ravens and things like that. But there's nothing that actively hunts wedge-tailed eagles. Apex predator is called the top of the food chain. You probably heard that. And it can be an omnivore as well as a carnivore. It doesn't just have to be a carnivore. We've got this food pyramid here. Now, this isn't correct from the point of view of going this to this to this to this, because we know that bustards and emus don't eat these guys here. What this is just telling us is where they are, what level they're at. So this is a fungi. A fungi is a type of decomposer, and what that does is it breaks down things that are dead. Quite often you'll think about when your fruit is rotting in the bowl. So that's a type of mold, is a type of fungi that's growing on that food. So we got carnivores generally at the top. Omnivores can be at the top as well. So we've got some omnivores here, herbivores and producers. So these guys are omnivores because they eat lots of insects and things like that. So a couple of producers here. We've got some seaweed, we've got some coral, a little bit of algae across the top, and then we've got some plants, and there's some grasses there as well. So they're using sunlight to produce sugars. We've got some herbivores down here. So it's a dugong, wallaby, koala. The carnaby cockatoo is a herbivore. It just eats nuts and seeds, doesn't eat insects or anything like that. Quite often parrots with their beaks. So that's an adaptation in order to break into those nuts and stuff. And we have some wild horses in the Kimberley. Those pests. Sorry, some of you won't like that, but they're an invasive species. New South Wales is a nightmare. And Victoria, the Alps up there for brumbies. So these guys are carnivores. This is a little nudibranch. We can see this bird-nosed wrasse has a little crustacean in its mouth. That was a pretty lucky shot. I didn't even realise it when I took the picture that that's what was going on. Bungara is a carnivore. Thick-lipped wrasse is a carnivore. Dolphins are carnivores. And we've got a white-bellied seagull, a juvenile one, which is a carnivore. So we have some omnivores here. We have a green sea turtle, a bustard, we have a sea urchin, we have a dingo, because dogs are omnivores, we have a whale shark, emus, and then we have decomposers here. So starfish are actually decomposers. We've got a sea cucumber here and a couple of examples of fungi. That's a mushroom looking thing on the right. That's worth watching. That's when I found myself in the middle of a reef sharks hunting during the day. It was a pretty amazing experience. So a predator is an organism that hunts other organisms for food. Usually it's an animal that eats other animals. Occasionally you'll have a plant that eats animals. We don't really consider it to be a predator if it's a herbivore just eating a plant. It's not really hunting, is it? And the prey are the organisms being hunted by predators. So this wedgies will hunt small kangaroos and wallabies. This one was just roadkill, and look at the size of that eagle. We can see this little eagle ray is, I reckon it's eating an octopus, but it's really hard to tell what it's got in its mouth. Didn't hang around for very long. And here we have a flathead. It kept jumping up and grabbing, trying to grab these fry. So fry is the name of baby fish. Food chains. So we've kind of spoken about this already. So we got sunlight, then plants make sugars, then herbivores or omnivores eat plants, and then carnivores or omnivores eat. So we can see the arrow showing the direction of the energy. So the energy comes from the sun, into the grass, into the kangaroo, into the dingo. The reason why these guys have to eat other organisms is because they can't produce energy using sunlight. So they have to get it from something that has produced energy. Here's a couple of other food chains. So we've got coral, we've got a triple tail Maori wrasse, and this wrasse eats coral. We've got an octopus, which if it can get one of these, it'll eat it. And then we have reef sharks that will eat octopus. Funnily enough, this photo was taken in the same spot as this one, and this one was taken during that reef shark frenzy that you watched on the video from the last page. It couldn't have been that octopus, only lived for 12 months. So, food chain shows the flow of energy. So we've got the algae on top. Damselfish here will eat the algae. We've got an olive sea snake here, which will eat the damselfish. Osprey will come in and grab sea snakes if they're at the surface. And a wedge-tailed eagle would eat an osprey if it gets the chance. It's a much bigger bird. Food chains are one way of demonstrating something, but it doesn't really take into account everything. So what we have here is we have a food web. Now the food web shows that, see this grass here? Grass is eaten by the emu, but also the kangaroo. So there's lines going from the grass to both the red kangaroo and the emu. We can see that koalas are eaten by dingoes, but they're also eaten by wedge-tailed eagles. So can we see what's at work here? It's not just one thing. We can see the princess parrot eats the bloodwood tree, it also eats the acacia, it also eats the marigold daisy. So these are more complicated, but they more accurately reflect what happens in an ecosystem. The reality is that it's even far more complicated than this, because you have to take into account every organism that's living in the ecosystem, which could be hundreds. That becomes very messy. So this one's a little bit messier again. So this is on the savanna, so the grasslands in Africa. We can see apex predators here. We can also see, well, the lion is the apex predator. We can see there's a lion coming from, I'm not sure what kind of cat this is. Anyway, going to the lion, and hyenas must eat wild dogs. I think in this ecosystem we'd consider the lion to be the apex predator. And then we can see this is Antarctica. Very reasonably complicated yet again. The apex predator would be the orca. The blue whale, adult blue whale would not be hunted by orca. They're just way too big. Humpbacks are still too big, so this is not to scale, to do with sizes. Minke whales would be hunted by orca. Whatever kind of looks like a pilot whale. The right whale, I don't know what that one is. But certainly, oh, that's the fin whale, yeah. So the fin whale is certainly eaten by orca. Some species of orca will hunt a fin whale. So there's 6 different species of orca, and they're all varying sizes. So the really big orca, they can hunt down a fin whale. They can hunt down quite a large whale. Some species of orca will eat stingrays or sharks. And here in Western Australia, we have, up at the Ningaloo Reef, we have a couple of pods of orca that grow up every year. And what they're doing is they're hunting humpback calves, because the adult humpback is way too big, but they'll hunt the calf, and they take, 1 or so a day, but when there's 10,000 coming through, it really makes no impact on the population. I'm sure it's not very nice. I've seen one hunt, it wasn't very nice.